doesn't have any good options left. He has a bad option and he has a worse option. And I hope he takes the bad option. And for Trump, the bad option is going to be, he's going to actually have to negotiate, not dictate, right? So the United States keeps coming in with these 14, 15 point things, a one-page MOU, and we're still trying to dictate, like, hey, Iran, here are our terms, accept them or we'll bomb you. And that's the worst option, is if we go back to bombing, because Iran has come out and said, and I believe them, I'm going to take them at their word on this, that they still have the ability to punch back. Is it 70% of their launchers, 50, 60? Doesn't matter. It's enough to get the job done. And of course, they've also promised, if you attack us, if you attack our energy infrastructure, like Israel's coming out and saying, oh yeah, you know what? We got a great idea, guys. Let's just bomb their energy infrastructure. Obvious war crime. But beyond that, if Iran then punches back and goes out and takes out, and they've already named their targets, right? That east-west pipeline to go to the Yanbu port, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, get that closed down, maybe with some Houthi help, and also take out the Fujairah Oman pipeline port. If they do that, the world is out another 10 million barrels a day. And that's, set the egg timer for implosion of the global economy. It's very bad. So put this in context.
Yeah.
We're short about 10 million barrels a day right now of actual crude and high value products. The last time the world was consuming 10 million barrels per day less of those same things, to look back on the chart, the world economy was 30% smaller than it currently is. So you would expect, maybe there's some fat in there, 20 to 30% decline. We're talking Great Depression, absolute Great Depression. But what's different from now in the Great Depression is now we have this just-in-time global economy. It's very cost-effective. But if product A doesn't land in assembly line B, it's just everything's all intermeshed at this point in time. So I don't think there's a way to detangle this, control it, contain it, any of that stuff. So if Trump goes with the worst option and bombing resumes, and by the way, I know your listeners are familiar with this because they're listening to you, the ceasefires had a lot of firing going on every single day, right? Tankers, ships, planes, all kinds of stuff. So it seems like a fragile ceasefire, euphemistically. To me, it's not a ceasefire if you're still shooting at each other. But if that goes hotter than this, that's when I think we actually have to face the prospect that there's no easy way out of this, and we're going to have to buckle down for a very serious economic downturn.
Yeah. There's, let me see that piece of news that came in now. While you speak, Iranian official sources on the details, where is it? On the details of Iran's response to the U.S. proposal. Al Jazeera and Al Mayadeen, citing Iranian official sources, report that Tehran's response to the U.S. proposal covers ending the war across the entire region, including Lebanon, framed as a red line condition, full lifting of U.S. sanctions, return of frozen Iranian funds, not partial. They don't say full either, but return of frozen Iranian funds, continued Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, nuclear program negotiations. So they're essentially saying, well, okay, well, you gotta control Israel. You gotta completely lift sanctions. Just completely lift them all, not partial, and some of them need Congress. So I don't know how it's gonna lift them completely. Return of the frozen Iranian funds, and they continue controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And later, there'll be nuclear program negotiations. So they're essentially, how is that even an offer? Sorry, I significantly criticized Trump for getting into this stupid war. But like when the Iran is like, you know what, we want you to lift the sanctions before we get into nuclear program negotiations, I start to worry. I'm like, hey, do the Iranians are they biting off more than they can chew, or do they want to drag him back into a war? That is a pretty significant demand. That is crazy. Yeah.
Well, it is. And I didn't hear you say, because there was one other thing they've been somewhat consistent about until about a week ago, and I haven't heard it since, but is reparations, right?
They haven't said it yet. Yeah, they haven't said it.
Yeah, you know who pays reparations? Losers, right? So they're clearly saying these are our terms, and they've been fairly consistent, maybe with reparations coming off. So that sounds like progress, actually. That would be okay. But yeah, they're saying, no, we're not going to have any nuclear negotiations. And we saw all these leaks from Axios, Ravin Barak out there saying, oh, they've completely agreed to give up not only their nuclear program for like 20 years, but they're going to just mail all of their highly enriched uranium to the U.S. Obvious propaganda, right? Yeah. So the question is, who's negotiating in good faith here at this point in time? And these negotiations, like, remember when they said, oh, well, there's this one-page MOU, like you can solve something this complicated with that, right? So one of the things Iran's been clear about is security guarantees. I mean, let's just think that through. What's a security guarantee? Well, we'd really like Israel not to be bombing Lebanon. Okay, how would we monitor that? And if it does happen, then what happens? And there's a whole structured series of negotiations around that. Okay, you're going to have no planes in the Middle East, U.S. No, we're going to have some. Okay, they're going to have trackers on. Okay, if you turn your trackers off, then what happens? There's going to be that page just for security is going to be a document this thick, probably. Same thing for each one of those elements you just talked about. There's no way you do this with a one-page MOU. It's not enforceable. It's not detailed enough. And it's just, I don't even know what they're doing. So I interpret these as desperate moves by the Trump administration to create the appearance of progress, which has been used by some insiders to game the system and, make some money, right? A little awkward. But it's probably how Trump is used to negotiating. You set the table, you tell people what the terms are before they've agreed to them, and somehow that forces them to those terms. But at every step, all I've seen is Iran say, nope, not our terms. Here are our terms. They're not falling for that trick, such as it is. And that looks like complete stalemate. And then to the extent you send Witkoff and Kushner as your negotiators, I don't even know why you would do that. They were the ones who were negotiating when the decapitation strike happened. Obviously, they're damaged goods. They couldn't possibly be considered credible negotiators at this point.
So this is another one here for both came in at the same time. Wall Street Journal. Iran has sent a multi-page response to the latest U.S. proposal to end the war, leaving gaps between the two sides. Iran proposes an end to fighting and a gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz as the U.S. lifts its blockade on Iranian ports. Nuclear issues would be negotiated over the next 30 days. Iran is willing to suspend uranium enrichment, but for a shorter period than the 20-year moratorium proposed by the U.S. and rejects dismantling its nuclear facilities. It proposes that some of its highly enriched uranium be diluted and the rest be transferred to a third country, but with guarantees to the uranium will be returned if negotiations fail, or the U.S. later exits the agreement. So this is different to interesting. This
Where'd
is
that come
different
from?
to this. That's from the Wall Street Journal, which makes, to be honest,
do they name sources?
No, they say according to. Let me see if they mention anything. Iran is citing informed sources. So they don't say who it is. But that one, to be honest, makes more sense than the first one. The first one is Iran saying lift the sanctions before we even concede anything. This one says, hey, we'll discuss the nuclear program later, which will involve sanctions, because that was always part of the discussion. And for now, let's just lift the blockade. We control the Strait of Hormuz. It's not mentioned, but it's already de facto because they already they made a website, sent an agreement, etc. And for the enriched uranium, we'll send it to Russia. But there is a massive trust issue. That's what worries me. They even said we need guarantees that if US breaches the agreement, the enriched uranium is returned to us because they see it as a deterrent. So there's a massive trust issue where the Iranians are worried they'll be screwed again. There'll be a deal like the JCPOA and they'll be ripped up and they're back to wartime. So that's the concern. That makes the deal hard.
Well, how could they have trust, right? They're not going to be able to trust anything. They're going to have ironclad guarantees and verifications, and also there's going to have to be punitive. There has to be some sort of a consequence if or when the deal gets broken, because the other party that they're negotiating with here is Israel, right? And Israel just breaches ceasefires and shreds agreements all the time. So I don't even understand how you could get anywhere as an Iranian negotiator without understanding how Israel gets put on a leash in some way, shape, or form. And Trump doesn't seem like he's that kind of person to be able to or want to do that for whatever reasons, right? So that's the wild card. And of course, every time we seem to get close to something, Israel seems to step over the line and do something, right? So remember early on, it was like in March, and Iran said, don't hit energy infrastructure. And then the oil depot south of Tehran got bombed by Israel, right?
You're talking about the oil started raining oil, yeah?
Yeah.
Is that the one? Yeah,
yep.
Ridiculous.
And the U.S. even came out and sort of expressed dismay that they had done that without notifying them, but they must have been livid behind the scenes because that was a provocation that took it to the next level. And then after that, we saw all these Iranian missiles targeting other sort of infrastructure things around the GCC. So again, I think that's the other wild card we have to consider here is
do you think that will
Israel.
What do you think? Yeah, what do you think of Israel? What do you think they'll be like? Do you think Trump could drain them in?
Well, he doesn't seem like he wants to, or I'm not sure he can at this stage. For whatever reason, he seems particularly weak when it comes to resisting Israeli demands.
I'm just seeing now there's more updates on this deal, if there's more clarity on it. Well, there's another piece of news that came in exactly at the same time 3 minutes ago. France to cooperate with Iran and Strait of Hormuz. France is planning a mission to ensure the security of the Strait of Hormuz in coordination with Iran, adding that there is no talk of military deployment. Okay, so Trump is interesting. So that's France saying we're going to be talking to Iran. So this is, there's two ways to open the Strait of Hormuz. One of them is militarily force it or work with the Americans. This is Macron saying, hey, we're going to do it diplomatically with Iran and not seek the military option. So the argument that no one has any looking at the negotiations developments, nothing new other than that Wall Street Journal article. But everyone's been saying that there is no alternative for the world than to go through Iran for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. That's always been the one side of the argument in that Iran war debate that is going on online. Well, Macron just kind of answered it and said, hey, we're going to sort the opening of the Strait of Hormuz diplomatically with France. So with Iran. So I think do you think there's going to be a world where Iran does not control the Strait of Hormuz, or that's already established?
No, that's already established. And by the way, every single war game that ever got put out starting in the 80s always showed that Iran ends up controlling the strait because it's a geographic nightmare, right? Small choke point, very narrow, right on its coast, mountainous terrain. And with the advent, it was even 20 years ago, they had the Russian SS-N-20 Sunburn missiles, which could have all on their own been really good. But of course, missile and drone technologies really ramped it up even more than that. To my mind, we haven't seen that Iran has even broken out a hypersonic anti-ship missile. They've been sending out some slower things, cruise missiles. Those have been sufficient to get the job done. Let's just be clear. Unless you control about 300-400 kilometers inland, and I mean control, you haven't missed a single garage. There's not a single cave that has gone unsearched and demilitarized. You can't control it. So they're always going to be able to rain missiles in on that. So you're going to have to do something else. But here's the problem. We have a ticking clock, Mario. The ticking clock is we're watching world global oil inventories just dwindle. All the onshore inventories, those are gone. And now we're eating into the onshore inventories, and we don't have months in this story. That whole thing that came out last week before, like, oh, Iran's going to crumble before we will. Yeah. No, they won't. That was a silly talking point. We tried it to see if it would work. It bought us some time. We moved a lot of military assets into the region. Thankfully, we haven't decided to go that route. All we have left is a negotiated settlement at this point. That's just, I think, just completely common sense, obvious at this point.
Chris, what I'm really concerned about is the repercussions of this war, the negative consequences of this war to the US are so great that negotiating a deal is not an option. Like, you're talking about Iran controlling one of the most important energy choke points in the world, potentially the most important energy choke point in the world, which de facto gives it Chinese control. And, a lot of people are arguing, I'm one of them, that this whole war was mainly because Trump or the US wanted leverage over China. China has rare earths. Well, the US could have control of the energy flows around the world. Venezuela, Greenland, the Panama Canal, less important, and the Strait of Hormuz. But now you're talking about the complete opposite happening. It's not a failed mission. It's a mission with, the law of unintended consequences on steroids. The complete opposite happened, where now China has more control through Iran, has more control than ever of the Strait of Hormuz. No one can challenge it. No one in the Gulf can militarily independently challenge Iran. And the willingness to face the damage that Iran has faced. They've just gone through massive bombing by the US and Israel. No country in the region is willing to go through that in order to militarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The global community, well, we just saw Macron now, as I said, he wants to cooperate with Iran. When Trump asked him and NATO to open the Strait of Hormuz, they rejected. And a month later, they're talking to Iran about letting their ships go through the Strait of Hormuz. But my worry is that this is such a massive strategic loss for the US that maybe Professor Pape and others are right. Maybe Morandi is right. Maybe these people are right that war is inevitable, because based on what the Americans want to achieve, what their objective is, and what the Iranians are giving them as an option in the negotiating table, it would be catastrophic to accept. Maybe it is the only choice, and maybe it is also more catastrophic to continue war. But I worry he falls into the escalation trap.
Well, he's already in the trap. So the question is, which path forward at this point? But if we back up a tiny bit, you mentioned, okay, when the dust settles, neither of us, I think, will be surprised to find we're in a multipolar world at this point. We kind of were in a quasi multipolar world, but the United States still sort of squatted on the whole thing. We're the big dog. We got the military. Reputationally, our military was incapable of not only defending our allies, who went to great political cost to allow U.S. bases on their land. We couldn't even defend our own bases on those places. By March 2nd, I already knew exactly how bad this was, because we woke up that morning and we saw these Shahed drones just dialing into radar domes. We had a few early satellite images that came out. We saw the loss of those really expensive radar systems, and it was obvious that after a decapitation strike, Iran loses all of its top people, or a significant chunk of them, and within 5 minutes, they're dialing back and responding. So they were totally ready for this event, right?